All right, let's keep it going with some more schedule previews. Like I said, I hope to do a ton of these. I want to get through as much of the Power Five as I can, and even some Group of Five. I feel bad that the Group of Five is on the floor, but it is what it is. What are you gonna do? There's nothing you can do. Anyway, we're just getting started with these schedule previews. I've done one or two so far. Like I said, we're going to keep them going. I don't expect everybody to watch every single one. But if you're curious about what I think about certain teams, then watching the schedule preview of that team is a pretty good way to find out. These are not prediction videos. How many times we're going to have to keep telling you the prediction videos come later? This is a schedule preview. Here we go. On to the next team. All right, Shorthorn man. Today we're going to do the Texas Longhorns 2023 college football schedule preview. I do these videos every year where I just look at the schedule. So this isn't a prediction video. I'll do those later in the year. This is just trying to get an idea of Texas' schedule for this season. You know, compared to last year, is it easier or harder? What, you know, the non-con games, were the non-con opponents harder last year or this year? What about the conference games? Which ones are on the road? Which ones are at home? Rivalry games, where do they fall? Any potential trap games? Where's the bye week? Is the bye week somewhere to potentially help the team, in this case Texas? Back-to-back road games, which can sometimes be tricky. Tough stretches of games during a schedule, that kind of thing. One thing I noticed when I was looking into this morning is I don't know if Texas got enough credit last year for its non-con schedule. Now, everybody knows they played Alabama, and look, anytime you put a team like Bama on the schedule, right, people are going to talk about that. So, you know, everyone knows. But their other two non-con games were Louisiana Monroe and UTSA. Now, those aren't top 10 teams, but, you know, UTSA spent a lot of the season ranked last year. Louisiana Monroe has had some good years in the last few years. A pretty good non-con schedule for Texas last year, and a pretty tough non-con schedule, too. I mean, clearly the Alabama. But like I said, when it comes to the Group of Five, UTSA and Louisiana Monroe are two Group of Five teams that I would put at least, you know, in the upper third of like Group of Five teams. So this year's Texas schedule, a little bit easier in the non-con. Now, they still get Alabama in the second part of the home-and-home series, and this year they got to play at Alabama. Last year they got them at home. Nearly won the game. You know, a lot of people argued maybe should have won the game or could have won the game had Quinn Ewers not got hurt early in that one. And, of course, we'll talk more about Texas quarterback situation in a second. But they have to travel and play in Tuscaloosa this year. Alabama is a better team at home than they are on the road, generally speaking, especially the last couple of years. Alabama was 10-2 last year. Both their losses were on the road and nearly lost to Texas. So having to travel there, definitely more difficult than getting them at home last year. Now, the good news is if you're a Texas fan, this game comes early in the season, a season where Alabama has a bunch of question marks entering the season. Probably more question marks for Bama heading into 23 than any season under Nick Saban since maybe the first or second season back in 07-08. But, you know, kind of a iffy quarterback situation. Jalen Milroe played a little bit last year, didn't look great. Ty Simpson is there, hasn't really played at all. They lose Jahmyr Gibbs, who was their best offensive player, not named Bryce Young. Of course, they lose Bryce Young. They've got some talented wide receivers, but, you know, these are the same wide receivers that led the SEC in drops last year. So got to get better there. They lose Will Anderson on defense. So a lot of questions, but you have to play them there. You know, it'll be a good game. The other two non-con games are Rice and Wyoming. So definitely an easier draw on those other two non-con games than what Texas played last year, UTSA and Louisiana Monroe. Who's the quarterback for Rice in 2023? Can somebody let me know? I'm drawing a blank there. Yeah. Anyway, speaking of question marks, Texas, of course, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning. Now, I think Quinn Ewers is going to be the quarterback for Texas in week 1 and the last week of the season, barring injury or total collapse from Texas. Texas has to improve record-wise, okay? Now, we can go back and forth and debate like which areas on Texas' team, which position groups, which players, whatever, might need to perform better in order to get to a better record. And that's fine, and we'll have some time to do that in the offseason. But wherever you think the improvement needs to occur for Texas, it's got to result in more wins. You know, Sarkisian's been there for several years now, yet to have really a breakout season. You know, every year in the offseason, some people kind of, you know, predict, you know, this is the year Texas kind of, they're going to win the Big 12, blah, blah, blah. Hell, I've done it myself. I may do it again this year. I do think Texas is a talented team. They might have the second most talented, maybe third most talented wide receiver room in the country. I mean, there are some serious threats at wide receiver at Texas. They brought A.D. Mitchell in from the transfer portal out of UGA. He's Georgia's best wide receiver, talent-wise. Now, he was injured for a large portion of last season. He didn't play much during the year. Played in the playoffs, though, scored a touchdown in both playoff games. Did the same thing the year before, scoring. I mean, the guy, he's a gamer. And the bigger the game, the better he performs. That's a big addition for Texas. They add him to Nair and Xavier Worthy. I mean, those are three legit probable NFL wide receivers that Texas is going to be trotting out on the field. And they can play all three of them at the same time if they want to. So Quinn Ewers, or if I'm wrong and it ends up being Arch Manning, whoever the quarterback is going to have plenty of wide receiver talent to try to get the ball to this year. So we'll see how that goes. Defense got to play a little bit better, but, this is Texas last year in the Big 12. They're getting ready to transition to the SEC along with Oklahoma. Everybody in the Big 12 is going to be gunning for Texas because of that. We saw that last year in road games for both Texas and Oklahoma getting booed. The SEC overrated chance, stuff like all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting season for both Texas and Oklahoma, particularly in these road games within the Big 12. But quarterback, Arch Manning, Quinn Ewers, great wide receivers. Got to get better on defense. Important year for Steve Sarkisian, I think. I'm still a believer in Steve Sarkisian. I mean, I don't think anybody doubts his offensive mind or whatever. There's always a question when a coordinator becomes a head coach. How is his skill set as a coordinator going to translate to a head coach? We've seen some coordinators become great head coaches. We've seen some great coordinators become terrible head coaches. So, I think the jury's still out on Steve Sarkisian. I still think he can be a good head coach. But an important year for Texas in a lot of ways. With Arch Manning sitting on the bench, a lot of pressure on Quinn Ewers. I mean, every time he throws an incomplete pass, you're going to have some portion of the fan base yelling for Arch Manning. It's going to be an interesting season. But let's run through the schedule here. 3 non-con games to start off the season. We've already talked about them. You open up at home against Rice, then you play on the road at Alabama, then back home against Wyoming. So overall, I think a little more manageable non-con schedule. At Alabama, clearly tougher than Alabama at home last year, but Rice and Wyoming both, I think, easier opponents than the two you had last year, UTSA and Louisiana Monroe. That takes us into week 4. You start your Big 12 games here. Now, of course, the Big 12, this one particular season, is going to have 14 teams, right? They've had 10. They've added 4, and they still have Texas and Oklahoma, right? So 14 this year, the new teams: Central Florida, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati. They play a couple of those teams. We'll get to them here in a second. But you open up September 23rd on the road at Baylor. Baylor a little disappointing last year after the great season they had the year before. We'll see if they can rebound this year and get back to kind of more the team they were in 22 as opposed to sort of a little disappointing last year. On the road at Baylor. Not one of the most difficult places to play, but still an important game for Texas, their first conference game on the road at Baylor. Back home to Kansas. Hey, Texas beat Kansas last year. Round of applause. Of course, Kansas had beat them the year before, much to the chagrin of the Texas man. Shorthorns mad about that. Revenge last year. Texas got the win. You get them at home this year. And then the rivalry game, the Red River Shootout, or the Red River Rivalry, whatever they're pretending to call it these days, played at a carnival for no particular reason in Dallas, Texas. Neutral site game every year. Saturday, October 7th. Oklahoma, a lot of the things I've said about Texas, you can say about Oklahoma. It's an important year for them. Last year in the Big 12, getting ready to transition to the SEC. How's all that going to work out? Texas and Oklahoma would love nothing more than to leave the Big 12 with a Big 12 title, both of them. And this game in a lot of years goes a long way to determining who wins the Big 12. Now, clearly that wasn't the case last year. Oklahoma fell on their face. Texas had a better year than the year before, but still never really a threat to win the Big 12. There wasn't ever really a point in the season where I thought Texas was the best team in the Big 12 last year. Once the season started. In the offseason, yeah, there was lots of people, myself included, who thought Texas might end up being the best team. That obviously wasn't the case. TCU winning the Big 12, making the playoffs, and making the national title game. But always a big game, Texas and Oklahoma, October 7th. That game will be preserved as those two teams move into the SEC. So this isn't the last year we'll see Texas and Oklahoma play, but it's the last year we will see them play as members of the Big 12. But this game will be preserved as a yearly game, even once Texas and Oklahoma move into the SEC. Then you have your bye week. A little strange. Seems to me you'd rather have your bye week before the Oklahoma game. A lot of teams will construct their schedule in a way that gives them a bye week before what they consider to be either their biggest game of the year, their toughest game of the year, or a rivalry game. In this case, Texas takes their bye week after their big rivalry game against Oklahoma. Then you got to go on the road and play first-year Big 12 opponent Houston. Again, these are all going to be interesting games to me. The four teams: Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida. Their entire conference schedule is going to be interesting to me because I want to see how those, former group of five teams are able to perform now that they are considered a Power 5 team in the Big 12, right? So how do they do against some of the better Big 12 programs? And, of course, Texas falls into that category. They travel and play at Houston October 21st. Back-to-back games against new opponents. A home game the following week against the Bicycle College. BYU, a team full of 24-year-old sophomores there after they served their mission trip in Zimbabwe or whatever it happens to be. But that's the game on October 28th. Then you play Kansas State at home. Kansas State, good team last year. They lose some key pieces. I really like their coaching situation there. They got the most out of the available talent last year, and they tend to do that more often than not. It's going to be hard for them to replace that running back. He was one of my favorite players to watch last year, by the way. He's gone. But anyway, Kansas State, November 4th. On the road at TCU. Not the Big 12 champion, right? Not the Big 12 champion. That was Kansas State, wasn't it? Kansas State, I think. Last year was weird. A weird year in the Big 12 and the Pac-12. But Kansas State had a good year, so did TCU. You play them in back-to-back weeks. Kansas State at home, TCU on the road. They're replacing Max Duggan at quarterback. They also lose Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator, who was given a lot of credit for their offensive success last year, given the fact that he's ran a successful offense almost everywhere he's been. He's at Clemson now, Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator. But TCU on the road November 11th, back-to-back road games, because then you got to travel to Iowa State. And if there's one thing we know from watching LuTube over the last 8 years, it's that you just can't win in Ames, Iowa. It's impossible. No one's ever won there. So good luck. Of course, I'm being facetious. The Big 12 man tries to act like playing at Iowa State is like some impossible task. It's weird. I don't understand the infatuation with playing on the road at Iowa State. Look, I'm not knocking Iowa State, but, trying to convince people that playing at Iowa State is like some type of impossible task is just a little ridiculous. You come back home, finish up your regular season with Texas Tech. Texas Tech that beat you last year. Texas Tech was a surprisingly good team last year. Texas Tech is going to be curious. Are they going to be better this year? No, I think is it Oregon? They play somebody. Who is it they play like week 2? They have a big non-con game week 2, Texas Tech. I want to say it's Oregon. Anyway, Texas Tech's an interesting team to me in 2023. I don't think going into the season, it being the off season right now, the middle of spring practice, we haven't even seen spring games. We haven't gone through summer camp or fall practice. But like right now, as it stands now, I don't look at this Texas Tech game and go, well, that's a guaranteed win for Texas. I think Texas is a better team. I think it's obvious. I mean, they're extremely more talented, right? But Texas Tech, I don't know. Just keep an eye on Texas Tech. Texas Tech, I think, has the potential to be similar to like last year's Oregon State. Just a team that, look, again, I don't know if there's any Texas Tech fans that have ever watched this channel, but if you happen to see this, I'm not trying to disrespect Texas Tech, but no one pays attention to Oregon State generally. No one pays attention to Texas Tech generally. But you look up at the end of the season last year and Oregon State sitting there at 9 or 10 wins, Texas Tech could find themselves in a similar situation this year. I think they're a good team. They're well coached. Like I said, they beat Texas last year. Interesting game to end the season there for Texas. And if Texas has the season they hope to have, then there could be a lot on the line in this game against Texas Tech. A trip to the Big 12 title game could be on the line. If Texas happens to be sitting at 0 or 1 losses, then a potential trip to the playoffs could be hanging in the balance. So a big game to end the season there at home against Texas Tech. There you go. The Longhorns 2023 schedule. Again, I do my prediction videos later in the offseason, usually May, June, July, that time frame there. But a little bit earlier this time of year, I like to just go through and look at the schedules. I mean, look, one of the things you need to know before you get ready to predict a team's schedule is who the fuck they're playing and where they're playing them, when they're playing, that kind of thing. So going through these schedules team by team this time of year kind of helps me a little bit when I'm doing my prediction videos later on. Now, some of you are going to say, well, Lou, your predictions are dog shit every year. So, I mean, is it really helping? Trust me, it would be an even worse version of dog shit if I didn't go through these schedules. Anyway, appreciate you watching. Have a good morning. Talk to you again real soon.